Okay. One more day of lecture, then you guys have the big exam. Dun, dun, dun. Exam's written. Ready to go to the printers. 3 questions. 2.5 of them are pretty easy. 1 of them, good luck. Just kidding. Kind of kidding. Half true. Yeah, I think it's right. So, my highly tuned exam grade estimator has told me that this one should be just about what I want. So, if you think about like my logic behind writing exams, I'm shooting for an average of 80. The good students, there's 271 of you. I'm going to get 3 people with 100. I'm going to get 50 people with like really good grades. And then I'm going to get like 20, 30 people with some pretty bad grades. But most of you guys should be working around that 80 range, somewhere between 70 and 90. So that's the exam. Your TAs tomorrow in discussion, they're going to spend the first half of discussion going over exam review. The slides for that review are posted under this exam module. So they'll just talk you through kind of the basics, just to refresh you a little bit on what we've done. I guess the nice thing is we shouldn't need too much refresher because all those tricks and skills that we learned from Chapter 2, we've kind of been applying those in the stuff that we've just been working on this past week. So, but they will spend the first half of class doing that, and then they'll spend the second half talking about the stuff we do today. So there's the exam review. There's also exam room assignments. I'm going to send this out in an email later today. But those of you who are either McBurney students or needed the alternate exam time, you should have seen an email from me this morning already. If you haven't, that's an indication that you are not on my list of McBurney students or alternate exam time students. So if that's not right, you guys got to let me know as soon as possible. But our main exam is going to be over in biochem. We got 2 big old rooms. So we're going to split you guys up by last name. A through Q in 1125. It's like a 470 person space, so we'll fit in there. Or maybe it must not be that big. Maybe about 300 people. And then R through Z, you'll be in the room next door, 1120. But this is up there for all to see. Other thing, your equation sheet that's going to be on the exam is this guy right here. So take a peek at this when you're studying. If you're doing a practice exam, bring this along with you. The one gotcha is that this is 2 pages, and I'm only going to give you the first page because the second page is stuff that we haven't learned yet. So I'm going to save a tree and not print out 273 of stuff you don't need to know yet. Okay? But this first page, except for the bottom little bit, we know how to do all that. So that I expect you to be able to understand. Last public service announcement. Tonight at 5 o'clock in the Tong Auditorium in ECB, whatever direction that is, the preps folks are running a practice exam. So if you think you're ready to see a practice exam, or you just want to gauge where you currently are, go over there. I think, anyone from preps here today? How long do you give them to do it?
An hour.
All right. And then you're going to talk about it for?
Probably more than an hour.
All right. You got that? So book about 2 hours plus of your time. 5 o'clock, the first hour will be you sitting there struggling on 3 problems, but then they'll call it, and then they will talk you through them. So if you just want a little more time seeing more problems, hearing a fresh voice, check that out tonight, okay? Open to everyone. You don't have to be in preps to show up for that. Okay, that's all I got. TAs are going to handle the rest of the review. But look at your homework problems. Look at your discussion problems. Look at what you've got done in your notes. Hey, this stuff wasn't enough. You realize you're still struggling on those? Go read the book examples. Remember, every lecture that we've got, it's also got a couple of little bonus videos. You know, some of you probably watched these, some of you have been too good for them. Maybe now you realize you need them, okay? So check those out. It's all the kind of help we have to offer. If you're going through your discussion problems and they're still not making sense when you're sitting there by yourself looking at them with the solutions, hey, jump back into Michael's YouTube channel for these discussion videos. He'll talk you through and walk you through all those problems as well, okay? So if you didn't like it the first time, try it again. If you want to see this show over again, you can rewatch these lecture videos. Book out a few hours this weekend and just sit back and enjoy the show a second time, okay? Any questions, expectations, or final tips I got for you? All right. So we've looked at summing forces, x, y. Last time we got together, we looked at summing forces for polar coordinate system, for an NT coordinate system. Today we'll kind of add one new wrinkle. We'll look at summing forces over a system of particles. So what if I have not one thing to follow, but I have two? Hopefully those two things are somehow connected, that we can either use a relative acceleration equation, maybe they're connected via a rope, maybe they're connected via me standing on one of the objects, right? So there is some connection for these two particles that's going to make them operate like a system. So what are we going to do? So if we've got a guy or a gal riding in a canoe. Well, it's not a canoe because it's going to have a motor. If we've got this person on this boat cruising around, so I'm going to say that this is a woman, long flowing hair now. That's m sub w times gravity. We've got a lady on a boat here, and we can choose to model this as a person and a boat together. Or we could separate this into its two pieces, because this person can be moving and accelerating relative to that boat and doing different things. So this is the kind of the idea that we want to go with today. If I was looking at this as one system, so just one piece, I would have my free body diagram would look like a single point, because I'm modeling this system as one thing. So we would have some weight going down. We'd have our mass of our woman plus the mass of our boat times gravity. We'd have some normal force from the water. I got W's. I was trying to avoid the same subscripts, but I got W from water, the normal force from the water. And I got some thrust from my motor propelling us along, right? So this is kind of how we've looked at the world so far. If we did a single system model for our FBD, our kinetic diagram would also be just a point. And I didn't leave myself enough room, so I've got mass of the woman plus mass of the boat times acceleration in x. And that same thing in y. Mass of the woman, mass of the boat, acceleration in the y direction. So when I look at the system this way, I don't know what's happening. I have nothing about the internal forces of what this gal's doing relative to the boat, because I'm modeling it as a single system. Well, it turns out, which we'll show in a little bit, is that this gal can do whatever she wants. She can run to the front of the boat, run to the back of the boat. have some acceleration relative to the boat, putting some force into the boat with her feet. But all those things are going to be internal to the system. What's pushing up on her will be pushing down on the boat. If she's pushing herself forward, that friction on her foot will be opposed by the friction felt by the boat. So all of these internal forces will be equal and opposite. So whatever she's doing, however she's pushing and pulling on this boat, they're all internal forces, so it doesn't matter. The acceleration is still going to be just based on the external. So the external forces, how much does she weigh? How much does the boat weigh? What's the normal force coming up and the thrust? So, but sometimes we need to know. We need to know what's happening between her and the boat. So we draw this guy as two systems, or as two particles of one system. So if I separated gal from boat now, I have to draw the forces acting between them, those internal forces. So I've still got the mass of my woman times gravity, but now I've got a normal force between the woman and the boat. I've got my normal force from the water. I've got my thrust. And I've also got some friction happening between her and the boat. And that's got to be equal and opposite. So I'm putting it on her feet pointing to the left. I got to put it on the boat pointing to the right. The force of friction. So if I took this and I looked at her in the boat and I put them back together, all my forces should cancel. It's the same force in the opposite direction for friction. Same force, but in the opposite direction for my normal. So when you put them back together, all those internal forces will cancel. And that's kind of the key to what we're doing up here for one system. But now I've got two FBDs. I need two kinetic diagrams. So the top one, which corresponds to the gal, will just be her mass times gravity, not gravity, times acceleration in the x. And that's acceleration of the woman in the x. And I've got her mass times acceleration of her in the y direction. And the boat, it has its own drawing here. So mass of the boat, acceleration in the x direction for the boat, mass of the boat, acceleration in the y direction for the boat. So if we're separating this, now we can come in here and start to solve for some of these frictional forces between her and the boat, the normal force between her and the boat. What you're going to get is for every particle you have in your system, you're going to draw a free body diagram, kinetic diagram, and for 2D motion, you're going to have two equations that you can write from that. You can write your x equations and your y equations, just based on your picture. These internal forces, though, that's going to be the link between our particles. So let's keep this boat example going just a little bit longer. I'm just going to look at the x direction for now. So I could do that for my first equation. My first, this is the girl, the woman. I've got minus a frictional force. That's the only thing happening in x. So that's going to be equal to the mass of the woman times her acceleration in the x. And then if I look at my boat for the x direction, I've got now a positive frictional force. I've got a negative thrust that's pointing to the left. And that's it. It's equal to mass of the boat times acceleration of the boat in the x direction. And I just swap those subs. Okay. So here's my sum of forces for our two particles, just in the one direction. Do the same thing for the y direction, but let's skip that for now. So overall for the system, what we're showing here is that, hey, we can sum, if those directions are the same in the x direction, we can sum these over the entire system. So if we did that, I could just add these two equations together, right? So I'd have minus the force of friction plus the force of friction minus the thrust is equal to mass of my woman, the acceleration in the x direction of our woman, plus the mass of our boat, acceleration in the x direction of our boat. And as you summed up these forces, if you've drawn them properly and if everything's aligned, you're going to have these internal forces cancel. So you're only going to be left with the external forces that are acting on our boat. So I've got minus t is equal to mw times acceleration of the woman plus mass of the boat, acceleration of the boat. Okay? Let me take a quick trip down memory lane here. So if I look at where we started, just for a one particle system, combined system, this is my x direction equation. So I could have looked at what I have here. The only thing acting in the x direction is a minus t, equal to, oh, this looks different. It's equal to the mass of the woman plus the mass of the boat times acceleration in the x direction. So for the whole system, what are we doing? For the whole system, this acceleration is the acceleration of the CG. I've modeled the center of gravity of the woman and the boat, and I'm only tracking one location. This gal can move relative to the boat, so she might have a slightly different acceleration, but I'm only tracking the motion of their center of gravity. Here, I'm tracking their accelerations independently. Her acceleration, the boat's acceleration. How does this and this equate? So if you know what a center of gravity location is, I got a vector of a center of gravity. How we calculate this? I've got the sum over however many particles, I equals 1 to n. And I've got those individual masses times their locations divided by the total mass. So this is how we find the CG of something. If I've got just maybe a datum over here, I've got this point, and I've got this blob, and I've got this blob. Let's pretend like they're all lined up. So how do I find their CG? Yeah, it's about right here. I take this distance times its mass, plus this distance times its mass, plus this distance times its mass, and divide it by the total mass. And I get a distance value, probably about right here based on how I scribbled that picture. Okay? This is just our definition, something you probably did in statics when you were finding centroids. But if I have this position, take two derivatives, get to acceleration. So the acceleration of my CG. If mass is constant, I've got the sum, I equals 1 to n, of my masses times the acceleration of those individual points over the mass total. This kind of tells the story. I'm going to sneak this to this side. Hey, this is what we wanted to show. We said, hey, if I've got my total mass multiplied by its center of gravity, that's what we're doing in this case. This is my total mass multiplied by the acceleration at the CG. That's the same as the summation of the individual masses and their individual accelerations. Woman, her acceleration. Mass of the boat's acceleration. So these two things are actually the same, based on our definition of center of gravity and then just taking two derivatives. So maybe how should we think of this? Maybe I've got some slippery ice. And I've got a sled. And I've got me. So our CG, the combined me and the sled, we might be right here. And this slippery ice has mu of 0. Super ice. The kind that you're going to encounter early in the morning in January. You're going to lay on your back moaning when you hit it. So this is our CG location. Overall, I might be able to move relative to this sled, but there's no external force, right? So initially we're at rest. This thing's not moving. So if there's no external forces acting on this system, our CG can't move, right? Because the sum of the forces in the x is equal to mass total times acceleration of the CG. No external forces in the x direction, just me running back and forth. But this is also equal to mass of me times the acceleration of me plus mass of the sled, acceleration of the sled. Right? So if I run to the right, and I'm starting at rest, and I scoot this way, the sled's got to compensate. The sled's got to go the other way. So I move a little, the sled moves a little, we accelerate differently, or me in one direction, it in the other direction. But the acceleration of our CG just stays put. I could turn around, I could run back the other way on my sled. I'm going to go this way, the sled's going to slide that way, because my feet are applying some force internal to the sled, nothing coming back from the ice side. So I can run around and shift positions. I might be able to change position relative to the world, but that sled's going to compensate by going the other way. So as I go one way, it goes the other. Okay? Overall, though, if there's no external force, there's no external acceleration. So if you're initially going at some speed, there's nothing slowing you down or nothing speeding you up just by what you're doing on the inside. I'm sure there's like 5 more slides that tell us that. Okay, this was my slide that tells us that if we can track the acceleration of the CG, that's the same as tracking the summation of the individual masses and their individual accelerations. And this is what I just said. If it's moving constantly and there's no external forces, there's nothing that's going to change its velocity. Oh, man. Okay. Let's work a couple. Give you guys some practice before exam time. All right, so we've got a person trying to keep his balance on a sled that is sliding down an icy incline. Letting the mass of the person be 78 kilograms and the mass of the block being 25. And we're going to assume there's enough friction between the guy's feet and the block so that he doesn't slide relative to the block. Okay. Little piece of information there. He's not moving relative to the block, so his acceleration is going to be the same as the acceleration of the block. He's not moving relative to it. Determine the value of the normal reaction force between the guy and the block, as well as the magnitude of their acceleration if theta is 20 degrees. Neglect friction between the sled and the incline. All right. So we want to find their acceleration. And we want the normal force between A and B. So the normal force between A and B, that's what's happening between this guy's feet and the block. So the guy has a mass of 78 kilograms. The block has a mass of 25 kilograms. Theta is 20 degrees, and we've got no friction. A couple different ways we can tackle this, but let's break that down. I got two particles here. So initially, like, my brain starts cranking. Hey, I got two particles. The question asks me for what's happening between those two particles. I better separate this thing, right? Like, that's naturally where you should go. If I need to figure out the internal force, I'm going to need to separate this and treat it as two separate blocks. If this problem said, hey, tell me the acceleration of this guy in the block and tell me the normal force between the sled and the incline. This would be n. Then I'm thinking, I don't need to treat these guys as two particles. You told me he's not moving relative to the block. So I could say the acceleration of A is equal to the acceleration of B. So if they're moving as one unit, you're not asking me the normal force between them or the frictional force between them. You're not asking me about anything between them. Then I can just jump to one system. Solve it, you're good to go. In this case, we're not so lucky. I'm asking you for that force between them. So we do have to separate this thing. So method one. 2 FBDs and 4 equations. I got the guy's X, the guy's Y, the block X, the block Y, right? So if we go about this, I have point A, MA times G. I've got a normal force between A and B. Hey, that's what we want. And I've got a frictional force acting between him and the block. And this is going to be opposite onto B. This is point B. I've also got a weight of the block, MB times G, and I've got a normal force from the incline. One nice thing is that we know what this incline is. We know it's given as 20 degrees. So we essentially already know the direction of our acceleration vector. These two particles are going to track along this line. So I might be able to say if I want to do this in a XY system, I'm going to call this big X, big Y. My acceleration is going to be that magnitude of the acceleration times the cosine leg in X plus, looks like minus, negative sine theta in the J. So this incline is going to give us some information. It's going to say how these things are moving. And what's nice is that we just really have to track one acceleration because we were told that there's enough friction between the block and the guy's feet so that he's not sliding relative to that. So here's what we got. We could go in here, sum of forces for particle A in the X, sum of forces for particle A in the Y, sum of forces for particle B in the X, sum of forces for particle B in the Y. 4 equations. I can take a peek at our free body diagram and say how many unknowns do we have. So, we jump in here. Mass of A, got it. G, got it. Force of friction, don't know it. Normal force between them, don't know it. Come down here, I've got the normal force again, the force of friction again, so we don't have to double count those. I got the normal force between B and the incline. And I got one more. I got the acceleration. And apparently I just need the acceleration magnitude because I have its direction. And now I feel a little bit lazy in that I didn't draw the kinetic diagrams. So for the kinetic diagrams, mass of A times acceleration in the X, mass of A, acceleration in the Y. Here we can drop the subscript A because we know that they're related. But if you wanted for completeness, you could put a little A in there, even though you know they're going to be buddied together. For the Y direction, or for block B, same thing. Mass of B, acceleration of B in the X, mass of B, acceleration of B in the Y. So, 4 equations, 4 unknowns. You could get there and you could solve this. It might not be super fun, but you know this is my AX component, and then 8 minus A sine theta. This would be my AY component for both particles. And you can kind of brute force your way through this, and you could get everything you needed. I did that, and it took me a few pages. So for this one, perfectly fine. You got to separate these things to figure out this internal force. The way that we'll actually solve it, it's a little bit shorter in that almost take like a 2-step approach. If I think of this thing as one system for now, I know I need that internal force. But if I think of this thing just as a single block, the man plus the block together, I can immediately figure out acceleration because they're linked together. They're not moving independently. And then, if I know the acceleration, I can come back in and just pick one side, either the man or the block side, and solve these free body diagrams to get the internal force between them. So that way just ends up being a little bit faster. Absolutely nothing wrong with doing it this way. When I sat down to do it, this is the way I did, because I knew that I needed to separate these things to get the internal force. It was just kind of long. So let's do it a little bit easier. So option 2. Oh, also, quickly, nothing's quick when I do it. I left these in XY. you could have easily like cranked them a little so they're along the incline, right? If you crank them to line up with the incline, you help yourself out in some respects. You know that your acceleration is purely in this incline direction. So you call this incline direction. And you said this was x prime or little x and y prime. Now you know that all of your acceleration is happening purely in the little x direction. So that's nice. Your acceleration in little y is 0. Your normal force aligns neatly with this system, but all those other forces don't. So you end up maybe having to transform a few more pieces from kind of a big XY system into that rotated system to solve it. Would this have been any harder than doing it that way? I didn't run it all the way through. So maybe not, maybe a little bit, but just another way to think of it. If that's what your intuition was, my other intuition, whenever I see a slope, let me align to that slope. And then I go back to that free body diagram, I say, dang, not many of these guys align with that slope. Maybe I should stick with a traditional XY. So that's a decision you're making when you're drawing your kinetic diagrams. Okay, so my option 2. I'm going to use the full system to find A, and then I will look at just the individual particles. I will separate to find N of AB. So, starting with the full system, I've got the mass of A plus the mass of B times gravity. Internal forces are all squeezed down and stuck, hiding in there. I don't care about those. That's what makes this easy. So here I've only got 2 forces on this system. And I will align them with a little x prime, y prime system. Because now I'm getting some bang for my buck. I got to rotate one of these either way. And by rotating, I can take advantage of the fact that my acceleration is purely in x. So this is my FBD. This is my kinetic diagram. So I've got my combined masses, acceleration in the x prime, combined masses, acceleration in y, and I'm not going to use that. If we had friction on this hill, and my normal force was going to factor into the frictional force, then we'd need to use the y equation. But for this, we don't need to. So sum of forces in the x prime direction coming down the slope. What do I have? I have some angle theta. I want to draw this out because I know some people struggle with rotating things here. Okay. So I've got this force for gravity that I want to transform into this system. So I guess the way I think of it, I draw out my big X and Y. Right? That's kind of what I have here. And then I draw out my rotated system. Y prime, X prime. And then for my brain, I take it back to the problem statement and say, well, man, what the problem tell me the angle was? Problem gave me this angle here, theta. So then I just start walking it closer to where I am. Like, okay, if this angle is theta, these are two parallel lines. I know this angle is theta. Right? We learned that somewhere in geometry. And then I think, okay, I'm trying to transform this vertical piece into this coordinate system. So hopefully you're not red-green colorblind. But my red system for xy is rotated by theta relative to x here. And this angle here also is rotated that same amount, theta. And then I go like this. I say, hey, I put my fingers on like here. I see this angle is theta. And I go, and I rotate. And I've rotated this whole thing the same amount to get from here to here, to get from here to here, right? Is it terribly elegant? I don't know. This is just how I think of it. And I think that, well, I know that you're going to have to do this. So get used to rotating some things. Okay. So now I want to take this vector and I want to break it into its x prime and y prime components. So you draw those lines perpendicular. So I've got this component here for x, and it's pointing in the x direction, so brain tells me that's got to be positive. And in the y direction, I got this guy pointing in the negative y. That's not going to be. That's going to be negative. So now if I'm looking at my sum of forces in the x, back to where I just started, I want to break this thing up. I know I've got MA plus MBG. And for this angle, theta, it operates on the sine leg of x. So maybe it's easier to write it this way. That's the way I see it. And it's pointing in the positive. So that's my only external force acting in the x direction. The normal is pointing in the y. This is equal to my kinetic diagram. Mass of A, mass of B, acceleration of x. Yeah, look what I did here. I snuck that g inside. I don't want to do that. Okay? I've got the same total mass on both sides. Cancel that. My acceleration in this x prime direction is just g sine theta. That was the first thing we were asked for. Just figure out the acceleration. Got it. So now that I've got the acceleration, and remember this is an x prime, I want to jump back and split this thing apart and figure out this internal force. This is what I'm going after. So I'd have to draw this same set of free body diagrams again as I split this thing apart. And then it's decision time, which one do I pick? And I say, well, NAB for particle A, there's only like a couple things acting on it. Looks pretty simple. For particle B, there's an extra thing and it's at a funny angle. My brain tells me particle A is going to look cleaner. It's going to be a little easier to write. So that's what we'll do. So for particle A, and I'm looking at this in the y direction, because that's got the piece I'm interested in. So if I do that, sum of forces in the y for particle A, positive going up. Got an NAB and a minus MAG. So the normal force that I'm trying to find, minus A times G, is equal to go back to my kinematic diagram just for the particle now, because that's the free body diagram I'm using, just for the particle. And I want just mass of A times the acceleration of A in the y direction. All right. So what we want, something we've got, something we've got, something we kind of have. Don't really know our acceleration for A in the y direction yet. We just know our acceleration in the x prime direction is equal to g sine theta. This is in the y direction, though. So I want to swap this out. I have my acceleration written as g sine theta in the I prime direction. In order to use it in my sum of forces, I need to get this guy into xy. So I need to jump over here, and I need to write the x component. This is my I prime. I need to write that in terms of big X and big Y. So this is my I prime direction. And I want to write that in terms of Y and X, big X, or what we've called I and J. And we got our angle theta to help us out. So I prime, how much of this is in the X direction? Looks like it's cosine leg. Cos theta times big X. And in the Y direction, it's got the little leg coming down, so it's negative. It's minus sine theta in the big J. Take that, sneak it in here. This becomes g sine theta times cos theta in the I. And then for the j component, same magnitude, still g sine theta, but now its direction is a minus another sine theta. What we want to do is we want that acceleration's y component. This is our acceleration of A in the y direction. So that's what we're going to sneak in here. So if I do that, I bring that up. The normal between A and B is equal to, well, I won't do two things at once, minus MAG minus MA, now times just the y component, negative g sine squared theta, sine times sine. And just to fix this a little bit, NAB, moving this guy over, mass of A times g, both of those have the like term, 1 minus sine squared theta. You're extra picky. 1 minus sine squared, that's cosine. Squared. Okay? That last little bit was just some funny math, right? But what we're doing here is we're separating this thing because we need those forces between. When there was a decision to be made, do I take particle A or particle B? Option's up to you. Both will get you to an answer. One just might be slightly more painful. If you wanted to use particle B, you had to deal with that normal force. You had to solve that too. All right. Study hard. Good luck.